Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 11th of October, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to say we'll be joined by live video Skype link by Mark Anderson from American Free Press. Well, the weather has turned. There's definitely an autumnal nip in the air. We're seeing the leaves change on the trees down here in the West Country. And reports across UK are generally that it's cold, chilly, grey, overcast and not too good. All a bit English, I suppose. And we understand from Mark Anderson, who's in Texas, that temperatures around about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but there's a bit of a chill coming in the air there as well.
Well, we're going to start with David Davis giving a statement to the House of Commons yesterday on the next steps towards not leaving the European Union. Nothing terribly new in this, but we'll just run through it because there are a couple of comments that bear scrutiny. He began by saying, with permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll now make a statement on the next steps in not leaving the European Union. The mandate for Britain to leave the European Union is clear, overwhelming and unarguable, he said. As the Prime Minister has said more than once, we will make a success of Brexit, and no one should seek to find ways to thwart the settled will of the people expressed in the referendum of June the 23rd. It is now incumbent on the government to deliver an exit in the most orderly and smooth way possible, delivering maximum certainty for businesses and workers. So that all sounds good. He went on to say, we will start by bringing forward a Great Repeal Bill, and that will mean the European Communities Act ceasing to apply on the day we leave the European Union. So on the day we leave the EU, the Great Repeal Bill will come into effect, assuming it passes. It was this act which put the EU law above UK law, so that's the European Communities Act 1972. So it's right, given the clear instruction for exit that by the people in the referendum, that we will end the authority of EU law. So the Great Repeal Act then will convert existing EU law and domestic law. We've mentioned this already, wherever practical. There are over 40 years of European law and UK law to consider in all, and some of it simply won't work on exit. We must act to ensure that there is no black hole in our statute book. There you go. Then it will be for the House to consider the changes to our domestic legislation to reflect the outcome of our negotiation and our exit, subject to international treaties and agreements with other countries and the EU on matters such as trade. This is important. We'll come on to that in a second. He then went on to say, Mr. Speaker, the European Communities Act has meant that if there's a clash between an act of the UK Parliament and EU law, then it's the EU law that prevails.
I'm looking, Mike, so I don't actually remember our politicians telling us that. It was obvious that was what was going on, but I don't think they ever told us that.
I think they always denied it, didn't they?
Yeah.
He went on to say, as a result, we have had to abide by judgments delivered by the European Court of Justice in their interpretation of European Union law. The Great Repeal Bill will change that with effect the day we leave the European Union. He said, Mr. Speaker, let me be absolutely clear. This bill is a separate issue to when Article 50 is triggered. The Great Repeal Bill is not what will take us out of the European Union, but what will ensure the UK statute book is fit for purpose after we have left, and put the elected politicians in this country full in control of determining the laws that affect its people's lives, something that does not apply today. So he's claiming that that's going to sort that problem out. And he said, and we will, as Britain always should, abide by our treaty obligations, not tearing up EU law unilaterally, as some have suggested, but ensuring the stability and certainty as Britain takes control on the day of exit and not before. And I think it's that phrase which is the most important, and not before. So they will not deal with this issue of EU law. They're simply, as we mentioned last week, they're simply going to turn that into UK law. Nothing will change. We will continue on an even playing field with the rest of Europe. And in the meantime, between March, when they say they're going to invoke Article 50, and 2 years after that, when they say that process will be complete, in that time, there'll be new EU laws, which will then become new UK laws. So we'll be in sync with the European Union until the day we leave. And I believe, Brian, that we are going to remain in sync after we leave, because the word leave should be placed in inverted commas. We are leaving in name only if we're leaving at all.
Well, I find this remarkable, Mike, if we think about it. It's almost as though Britain was leaving an empire, leaving control of an empire, and we're about to become an independent country for this first time. So we're stepping out with trepidation. We don't know whether we've got our own laws. We don't really know whether we can govern our own country according to these people. So therefore, we've got to grasp that European law, and then we stick our noses out the door, and maybe as a nation state we'll just be able to look after ourselves if we keep that body of European law.
Got to hang on to like grim death, Brian,
yeah,
because
this
otherwise
is,
we'll drown.
this is lies, spin and deceit, because of course we were being told, as you said, for years that the European law really didn't affect our ability to govern ourselves, and now everything's being completely reversed. These people are despicable, and I'd like to use some other words, but it's a UK column, but I can't. Can we bring in Mark, actually, just see
before
what
we
he
do,
feels?
I just want to end on this one because this is important as well. He finished off by saying, Mr. Speaker, it is nations that are outward-looking, enterprising and agile which will prosper in the age of globalization. This government will build a global Britain. This is the new mantra. We're leaving the EU, in inverted commas. We're not actually, because we're going to stay in all the institutions. We're going to maintain the law. We're continuing with the European Union integrated military project. We're continuing with the various trade agreements. And in fact, we're going to produce more trade agreements with more countries. Hashtag Global Britain is the government's new hashtag because they are going to be rolling out this soft power project right around the world. And in fact, we're going to find not so much an expansion of the EU, but an expansion of the principles which founded the EU on a global basis. I believe that's what they're really up to here.
Creating the new world government, effectively, but it's going to run through the bones of the British Empire and the Commonwealth.
Absolutely.
And free trade, of course.
Yes. Mark, what are your thoughts?
We should call this the Loin Act, leaving only in name, because that's correct, you guys. You guys nailed it down. The quote of this gentleman clearly spells out the fact that you don't have to be officially part of a large bloc like the EU to enforce its edicts, to obey its principles, to have its laws embodied in your law. And they're simply embodying EU law and principles and directives into British law, but taking the official EU name tag off of it. It's a sleight of hand. It's like the global cities movement that we've often discussed here and on American Free Press and the newspaper, and where the cities confederate and have their own global grid in a quasi-independent move, independent of the nation states of which they're members. That's the same kind of thing there too. So this is trickery, very clearly. The TTIP treaty and the EU army will keep Britain enmeshed in the EU thrust anyway. So this is very insightful, and I think this really points to what's going on.
Speaking of the global agenda, let's bring this in because you wanted to highlight the continuing shenanigans of the Chicago Council of Global Affairs. I think you're going to go and see Anders Fogh Rasmussen speak next week. Is that correct?
I'm going to try. Rasmussen has been there several times over the years. He was there in 2014, right before the Wales meeting of NATO, the NATO summit in Wales. And he's returning Tuesday, October 18th. And now the CCGA, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, this is the Chicago version of Chatham House. They have a new conference center on Randolph Street in Chicago, right in the heart of the Loop. And the Chicago Council, briefly, is part of a constellation of world affairs councils throughout the United States. There are at least 60 or 70 of them under the umbrella of WACA, the World Affairs Council of America. And that is the committees that comprise the Bilderberg meetings and the trilateral meetings. These are committees that are all over the United States. A lot of people don't know that. Bilderberg is a network of these city-based and regional committees, and it fits into the Global Cities movement. And people like Rasmussen come and talk. His son lives in Springfield, Illinois, and he is delivering this speech. The theme is expected to be that the U.S. must no longer lead from behind like during the Obama years, because we had this questionable Iran deal, controlling the nuclear power in Iran and not letting it become a nuclear weapon. And because the U.S. needs to take a firmer stand against Vladimir Putin and Russia, and the U.S. Is lagging. We're leading from behind, Rasmussen is saying, and we need to get out front, as if the United States hasn't been out front all along, paying the majority of NATO's bills, putting the majority of the blood and treasure out front and center, at the front, not the rear. So, like often is the case, Rasmussen doesn't even really know what he's talking about. It's a bunch of legerdemain and Orwellian doublespeak. And he's basically saying 2 years ago, like when he was there, and now he's basically saying the US and NATO and the US and Europe need to lead the way in the fight for freedom, he says. And this is where it gets very Orwellian. Whose freedom? The freedom of the plutocratic elite, the moneyed interests, or the general populace? Is the United States really fighting for freedom along with Europe and NATO, or are they actually crushing freedom under a big black boot, like in the Orwellian metaphor? So many countries in the Middle East have fallen under the neoliberal, neo-capitalist, monopoly capitalist drone bombings and overthrowing their leaders, overthrowing their monetary systems. So when Rasmussen says freedom, just what is he talking about? That's the question.
And it's a good question. Now, how much freedom is there in the United States at the moment, Mark? Well, we've got an election coming up. Don't want to spend too much time on this clown show. I mean, there's been a lot of news media over the last couple of days about clowns running around cities in America and the UK. We think it's something to do with promotion for the film It, which is on its way. But this has got to be the biggest clown show of the lot.
My goodness, Stephen King has returned. Indeed, I mean, it's interesting. As you say, time is a little tight here today. This, of course, was the big debate the other night, the second of the presidential debates. There's been one vice presidential debate. The last presidential debate will be October 19th. And it just so happens the Chicago Council on Global Affairs is having a big gathering of its intelligentsia in Chicago to watch that final presidential debate October 19th on a big screen. Anyway, Hillary Clinton very distinctly said, as I indicate in the headline on my Truthhound blog here, thetruthhound.com, she distinctly said, "When I am president," to that effect, as it states in the headline there. When I am president, then I'll get ISIS out of Iraq. And a lot of people believe the media fix is in. There's been, of course, the flap about Donald Trump's barroom banter with Billy Bush. The media overlooks the fact that Billy Bush, the guy that recorded Trump saying these puerile words about women, he is literally the nephew of George Herbert Walker Bush. That means George W. Bush and the former presidential candidate Jeb Bush are Billy Bush's first cousins. This is completely papered over. Trump conceivably could have been set up to say certain things because they knew he was a rising star. That's speculation for another time, I suppose.
Right. But I'm just going to interrupt you there, Mark, because if we go back to the start of the year, you suggested there was a possibility that there were links between Trump and the Clintons, and perhaps Trump was there to take a fall at the end. The Clinton would become a shoo-in. Have you moved away from that position, or is that hinted at in what you've just said?
It's a tough call, Mike, except to say that it's never going to be out of the question. In other words, it is possible that Trump is a foil or a spoiler. I'm not sure exactly all the reasons why the establishment would do this. They could maybe have had Hillary be a shoo-in without having all this agitation from Trump. Why would they go through all those gyrations? But it also could be kind of a way to hurt the morale of the American people, give them a beacon of hope, and then take it away.
But he has completely split the Republican Party, hasn't he? With a number of Republicans openly declaring for Clinton.
That's true. It could be a strategy to damage the Republican Party. Of course, the Republican Party shoots itself in the foot all the time and doesn't need someone else shooting itself in the foot. But there's a lot of ways you could go with this. But there are some indications also that Trump is something of the real thing. This is where the path kind of diverges, and it's hard to make an exact call. But suffice to say that the media is very pro-Hillary, whether Trump is a spoiler or not. And it's more internationalism, more U.S. war. She's a war hawk dressed in traditional Democratic garb. And these debates, as you say, are a bit of a clown show. I think Trump has some salient points, and Hillary is of course, very damaged, corruption-laden in scandals. The Clintons should have been in jail long ago, as we know, and Trump was right in saying that the other night in St. Louis at the last presidential debate. But too much is being made of his anti-woman remarks, as they're called, and the realities of the Clintons' crimes, the Clinton body count. These things are being papered over. But I think that's sufficient for now, that we've got one more debate, and it's really just too bad we don't have more political parties that are viable and more real choices, and that we don't have more emphasis on congressional elections and get away from some of this emphasis on the presidency in the first place. You know, this is some of the tragedy, if you will, of the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. Another article from your blog, In the Age of Weaponized Media. I'm afraid I've chopped off a little bit of the headline there. What's the full headline?
Well, it's about the Ron Avery, a Texas citizen, versus Hearst Media and Dylan Baddour, a Houston Chronicle reporter. Now, this goes along with the Public Participation Project, the PPP article and link you have that you're also showing right now. These two things are inextricably linked. This is very interesting. I'll be as concise as I can. The Texas Citizen Participation Act is an example of how U.S. media will be controlled. You have the Leveson inquiry trying to inaugurate state control of UK media. In the U.S., they're a little more serpentine about it. With the first slide where you showed me and my wife and Ron Avery, the white-haired gentleman there, outside a Texas courthouse in Guadalupe County, in that first slide, we were at a court hearing on Mr. Avery's lawsuit. Basically, the newspapers at the Texas state level and through the Public Participation Project are trying to have these citizen participation acts. In Texas, they call it the Texas Citizen Participation Act. Now, through the Public Participation Project, they're trying to have a national level Citizen Participation Act. And what it is the corporations and the big media, which are corporations, are trying to protect themselves from lawsuits. And they're trying to say that, well, citizens who speak out against government can be protected under the Citizen Participation Act. If a big corporation is trying to take their land away for a pipeline or for a highway, the citizens have legal recourse, and they have freedom of speech to fight these big corporations that are trying to do bad things to them or their land. And that part of it is pretty good. But what happens, though, is the Citizen Participation Acts at the Texas level and at the national level are actually protecting the corporations and the newspapers rather than the citizens. It's kind of an inversion of reality. So with Ron Avery's case, he was libeled by the Houston Chronicle and by Dylan Baddour, a reporter for the Houston Chronicle, and he's trying to fight back, and he's finding that these Citizen Participation Acts are being used by the Houston Chronicle and Hearst Media, and by extension, other media, to protect the media from the citizens. Therefore, when citizens are libeled or slandered by the media, they are protected in the courts, and the citizens that the law is supposed to protect are finding they have very little, if any, protection. So the whole thing is a scam, an inversion of reality. Yes, citizens can find some legal relief, but mostly the whole thing is being manipulated by media corporations to protect themselves from the fallout of their own malpractice, from the fallout of their own shoddy reporting and libeling citizens. In Ron Avery's case, the Houston Chronicle made him sound like an insurrectionist, like he was a Texas patriot bent on terrorism, and that's why he sued the Hearst Corporation and the Houston Chronicle. So it's a little complex, but this is how they're trying to control media in the U.S. in the sense that they make media the controllers. Media becomes part of the controlling system.
Mark, if I can just respond to that, we're seeing the same picture, of course, in UK, and you're quite right with the Leveson, so-called Leveson inquiry. That was clearly the state trying to get further control of the press and media. But if we put in a positive note to see this massive reaction from global media companies, vast media empires, as a result of ordinary people speaking up and putting information out, they are clearly very frightened by the truth. And this is one of the things that we're continually pushing through UK Column, that when people say, yes, but what can we do? One of the simplest things to do is to be spreading the truth and exposing what is actually going on, because these people are terrified of it.
Indeed. To put a capstone on what you're saying, part of this then would have to be, logically, from the establishment's point of view, that you have to also protect the elite media, and so they can run roughshod over the truth, over citizens' rights, dress it up with a Citizens Participation Act, a false label, and therefore this corporate media that is in alliance with the government has to protect itself. And so it's a kind of multifaceted way of giving the dominant media even more dominance and trying to fight off citizens, but also, as you're indicating, Brian, trying to marginalize the alternative media in a direct or indirect fashion.
Okay, let's move on. Right, another day, another military exercise, this time in Scotland. It began on Saturday. This is 39 surface ships and submarines, 67 aircraft, exercise Joint Warrior. It's being run by the Royal Navy, and 5,700 military personnel, a whole bunch of different countries. In parallel with it is this one, Unmanned Warrior, Brian. Now, this Joint Warrior takes place on a regular basis, has done for years under various names. It used to be called Neptune Warrior, Joint Marine Course, and so on. But I think this one is new, Unmanned Warrior. And there you can see the Royal Navy's new drone speedboat there that we were making fun of a couple of weeks ago. So more exercises going on, multinational exercises.
Well, the picture's incredible, Mike, isn't it? Because we've got continuing cuts of the military. All right, we've got some orders that have come in with French steel for those ballistic missile submarines, but basically it's cuts. We've got severe manning problems. We've got equipment problems. We've got huge problems in the military, as Cameron's government in particular has cut and cut. Now suddenly we've got this flurry of exercises, and as we're going to be hearing in a minute, really serious events on the horizon, to use a pun, I suppose. So what is going on? We haven't got any money, but when the military's working overseas, we've suddenly got lots of money. And the other thing, of course, is those drones. We're now starting to see that we can have politicians not even going near the general public, no debate in Westminster, simply using drones to murder people overseas without any form of accountability. These are very dangerous times.
Well, let's look at how dangerous they are. The Guardian here, well, this is a couple of days old, but the BBC this morning hyping this up on the Radio 4 Today programme even more than it has been already, so I wanted to include it again today. US officially accuses Russia of hacking the Democratic, what's the DNC, Mark? Democratic National Committee, is it? Yes. And they're saying that only Russia's senior-most officials could have signed off on cyber attacks. And this is about the leaking of 19,000 emails from Democratic Party officials. What's the coverage been on this over the last few days, Mark?
Oh, probably moderate. more of it has been about the over 30,000 emails that Hillary Clinton deleted, emails that carried over from her days of Secretary of State, of course, and many of them were deleted after she was subpoenaed by a congressional committee, which Donald Trump pointed out on Monday night during the last presidential debate, the most recent one. So it's been more about that than about the DNC.
So, clearly the United States, the Pentagon, Obama, and now increasingly Kerry as well, putting a lot of pressure, on Russia. Is the US mainstream media covering this, or is this something that other countries are saying only?
No, there's quite a bit here. Kerry is very belligerent. The good old skull and bonesman out of Yale University, who became a senator from Massachusetts and is now our Secretary of State, he comes from that power clique. It's been pretty heavy, and Rasmussen, coming to the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, of course, is going to talk about more Russian containment, like we're back in the Cold War days as the US and the EU and NATO fight for freedom, with freedom in quotes there. There's quite a bit of anti-Russian propaganda. He's calling for more independence, Rasmussen, energy independence of Europe from Russia, so they're no longer dependent on Russia for energy. This rhetoric is picking up steam again. So it's pretty strong here, the anti-Russian stance.
Right. Well, it gets worse because the Speaker has allowed an emergency debate in Parliament today. And this is being pushed by Andrew Mitchell, MP. Now, Britain has been, and the US as well, but Britain particularly, have been aiming for a no-fly zone in Syria for a long time now. And because the Aleppo situation is particularly coming to a head, and the West's tame terrorists of ISIS and al-Nusra in Aleppo are really on their last legs, the pressure is building for this no-fly zone to be implemented. And we're getting to the point where British MPs are saying that Western air forces must be willing to confront Russian military jets over the skies of Syria, according to this article in The Guardian, to enforce a no-fly zone. Frankly, Brian, the day that we directly confront a military jet over the skies of Syria, we are at war with Russia.
This is astonishing, Mike, and if we could put it in context, if we go back to the Cold War days, the overriding aim was always to keep NATO and Warsaw Pact, or we'll say NATO and Russian forces, apart. You didn't want the actual troops or the aircraft getting near each other because somebody makes a mistake and the next minute the thing is escalated into conflict. And here we've got Theresa May's Conservative government suggesting we want to do the complete opposite. We want to get in there and get these military units in close proximity in order to have a showdown. Yeah. This is really dangerous stuff. And of course, it's not being picked up in the right way by the mainstream media at all.
Right. So the pressure on Putin from the West, and not just from the United States or from the United Kingdom, but also France. And of course, there's been a reaction because he is now cancelled, or at least postponed for the foreseeable future, his visit to Paris, which he was planning for next week. The New York Times here reporting this as amid diplomatic tensions. And Hollande's press office, they report, says that Russia wants Putin's visit take place at a later date. Well, perhaps it will and perhaps it won't. He was there to meet Hollande to inaugurate a new Orthodox church in Paris. But of course, it would have been the opportunity to discuss various things. That isn't going to happen. The other reaction is that the Russian Duma has given the go-ahead for a permanent airbase in Syria. So at the behest of Bashar al-Assad, the Russians putting an airbase in Syria. It's been given the go-ahead for that to be a permanent airbase. So effectively, if we're threatening to shoot down Russian aircraft over Syria, well, they're going to be in a better position than we are because they're going to have somewhere to operate from.
This is true, but it's unbelievably dangerous, Mike. I think we're going to have to do some more reading into this. But what is there going to be? Just a couple of hours debate in Westminster, and then Theresa May will tell the cabinet what the line will be, and then next minute the line is going to be peddled out to Britain by by the BBC. So we've got a warmongering government, and Putin has said when he looks at Western politicians, he's not sure they're actually sane, and I think he's correct. As usual, we're running out of words.
Yes.
Who's going to profit?
Indeed, who's going to profit? Well, look, yesterday we mentioned Colm Canning, and if anybody who's a member hasn't seen this interview yet on the UK Column membership website, do go and have a look at it. I believe there was some criticism or some skepticism about Mr. Canning from various people, and it was relating to this article from the Belfast Telegraph. PSNI Credit Union hired bent banker Colm Lewis Canning. Now, there are a number of points here. First of all, we have made the point at the UK Column time and time again of the number of people that we have come into contact with who report wrongdoing of some kind and end up being the victims of trumped up charges against them. This generally happens with people that attempt to report child abuse of some kind, but in the case of Colm Canning, it happened because he tried to whistleblow on the billions of pounds that were being stolen and assets stripped from British businesses. He was working for Ulster Bank, a subsidiary of RBS. The investigation into RBS and their asset stripping of billions of pounds of assets from UK businesses continues. It's being stalled, it's being held back, and there's a lot of pressure to bring it forward. It's one of those investigations that never seems to come to fruition. But nonetheless, he blew the whistle on it. And following blowing the whistle on it, he then came under attack himself, ended up in court on a trumped-up charge, and found guilty of a trumped-up charge. He explains that particular case in the interview that he gave to the UK Column. So do go and have a look at that if you haven't seen that interview.
So this is a fundamental point, really, because the whole aim of getting out truth, exposing what's really happening, is we are certainly hoping for more people to break ranks with establishment organisations, especially those organisations that are involved in wrongdoing. So it seems to us that one of the things that we have to look at is when people come across, you evaluate them. Are they good people? Have they now made the right decision? So can we get into the business that everybody who moves, who starts to speak out about what's happening, we can't be too sure. This leads you into no man's land. So we're going to say we've great confidence in Colm Canning. It was extremely brave of him to speak out, and his message about the wrongdoing of the international banks needs to be spread. He doesn't need to receive more of the same that he's had from the Belfast Telegraph. Well, sorry, let's just get in a quick advert for the British Constitution Group conference on the 19th of November. I'm delighted to say that tickets are going extremely well, but we'd encourage people who want tickets at £10 to get in your order via the website. They will be £20 at the door. But it's clear people are really picking up on the theme that we are now living in a lawless Britain in 2016, and accepting that's the case, what have we got to do to reassert the rule of law in UK? And as we hear the news today that our criminal government is now trying to ramp up full war in the Middle East, there's an increasing urgency to make sure that we get good people acting together wherever possible. So do come along. And we just also remind people that this Saturday I have been invited to speak. The subject will be on the NHS at the Lugger Inn in Penzance, and that's thanks to the Penzance Truth Movement. So details on this advert if you freeze it, but it's an all-day event. Down there in Penzance, and of course the demise of the NHS, important subject at the moment.
Okay, let's move on to unaccompanied children because the saga continues, and Amber Rudd now getting in on this. 300 children in the Calais refugee camp. She wants to bring them into this country. That would be a good result, she says. She said we have about 100 unaccompanied children in train who we hope to bring over in the next few weeks. But on top of that, I've made it clear that we will take children from the Dubs agreement. So we'll talk about that in 1 second. She said that, of course, the Calais refugee camp is about to be demolished. There are 387 children there who have a legal right to come to the UK, and she wants to bring them. If we ended up taking half of the lesser number of 300, that would be a really, of 600, that would be a really good result. So she's aiming for 300. We cannot imagine the UK with its traditions of human rights, you're right, will refuse to admit unaccompanied minors into the UK. The main objective is to ensure that these minors have a better life in the UK, where they have family and friends living in the country. And that was according to the French. That was a comment from the French side, anyway. So Ms. Rudd being sort of reinforced by the likes of Stella Creasy, Labour MP, bringing here every child who has a legal right to be in the United Kingdom would be a really good result. But let's keep the focus on Tim Farron. Now, of course, he didn't really say what I've got up on screen at the moment, which is, but if he was to do something about it, his parliamentary colleagues of all parties would have nothing to play with. That really seems to be the attitude of everybody that I'm coming into contact with. They will not address this issue of what happens to these children when they come into this country. I'm not saying children don't need help. They absolutely do need help. They end up in the care system in this country, and we've already seen that several hundred of them have disappeared out of the care system in this country, disappeared to where nobody really knows. The assumption is that they've been trafficked, that they're ending up in some form of sexual slavery.
And that was a suggestion from Mr. Farron himself.
Absolutely.
Mike, that's
absolutely.
not just us guessing. That was Mr. Farron saying he's no doubt that a proportion of them have ended up trafficked and abused.
It's not just MPs, of course. This is Help Refugees charity set up by some celebrities, I believe. They are calling for unaccompanied children to be brought to the UK. They say, today we're asking you to take action by writing to your local MP and then following up with a phone call to apply pressure to encourage the government to act quickly to meet their commitment to protect the unaccompanied children currently living in the Calais camp who have a legal right to safety in the UK. They have a legal right to safety in the UK, but there is no safety guaranteed in the UK, and that's our point. Then this organisation asks, why do these kids have a legal right to be in the UK? And they're talking about Dublin 3, which entitles them to be reunited with nuclear family members living in the UK. And they're also talking about the Alf Dubs Amendment. The Dubs Amendment, which was passed in May 2016, is supposed to bring an unspecified number of the most vulnerable unaccompanied children in Europe to safety in the UK, much like the kinder transport during the Second World War. Again, they come to the UK, they are not safe. So I wrote to this organisation this morning and I asked them for comment on this campaign that they're running. I asked them pretty much the same questions that I asked Tim Farron. Now, it took us 9 months, if you remember, to get a comment out of Tim Farron about this. And when he gave us a comment, he did not explain how these children would be protected once they came into this country. This organisation hasn't responded,
No.
And I don't think they're going to. So perhaps you might like to write to them. We need to keep the pressure on Tim Farron. We now need to put some pressure on Amber Rudd and perhaps one or two of the other MPs that are calling for this. Not to say that these children shouldn't be given help. They absolutely should be given help. But simply to ask the question, what are these MPs, what is this charity, the people that are working for this charity, what are they personally going to do to make sure that when children end up in the care system in this country, that they're protected within the care system, they're not abused within the care system when we've got such evidence for historical abuse within the care system, that they won't disappear back out the other side of the care system into some kind of trafficking infrastructure that we have no idea where they end up and what's happening to them. These people that are calling for these children to come to this country need to answer those questions.
Should we, just before we move on with some sort of detail on what's happening in UK, should we just, Mark, obviously this is a very UK-focused subject with respect to Syrian children and also children in Calais. What's your picture on it from, what's your, how do you see it from America there? Obviously, there's been these tales of similar problems in the States, and some people argue that up to 300,000 children a year simply disappear in America.
I don't know those numbers exactly, Brian. Certainly, you guys are very justified in being skeptical of these charities. There have been a number of cases where either legitimate charities, ranging from the disabled veterans who don't really help disabled veterans, to all sorts of other charities, have used these sorts of crises simply to raise money and pad their coffers. And that's just the first level of wrongdoing. And if child trafficking is involved, and it very well could be, then really we have to get to the basis of this. And that, of course, comes back to NATO and the US and the UK and this permanent war footing and this constant saber rattling toward Russia and all the conflicts going on, turning a blind eye to Saudi Arabia, killing children there in Yemen, and the whole war machine that is creating the whole refugee problem and all these dislocated children and all these orphans. These things are an outcome of Western foreign policy. And if these MPs would get that in their head and they would see that connection, then we wouldn't have to have so many charities, many of which could be fraudulent or abusive. We wouldn't need them in the first place because these children wouldn't be driven out of their own lands. And I think that that's the fundamental point that we always have to keep in mind and keep drilling into the minds of US and British legislators. That's the key.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Mark, thank you for that. And you're absolutely right, of course, if we weren't creating these battle zones overseas, we wouldn't have the mass migration and the children suffering within that. But let's come back inside the UK and have a look at just how bizarre the system is. This is a letter which is kindly provided to us by Robert Green. It's come from the Home Office. It's come from their direct communications unit. This is back in September 2015, and the subject is Melanie Shaw. Now, the basis of the letter is that Mr. Green's letter to Karen Bradley, who was Minister for Preventing Abuse and Exploitation, it's been received, and apparently she's going to look into it. And then this is the British government saying they're very sorry to hear about the case of Melanie Shaw. This is the child abuse survivor who was brave enough to stand up and whistle blow. This lady knows stuff not only about children being abused and she says murdered, but also the involvement of British politicians in what took place. She's presently in prison again, and we don't know whether she's on remand or whether she's been charged. She's not receiving letters. She has had one or two visits, but in general, she's been kept in solitary confinement. Effectively, she's been disappeared into the British prison gulag because of what she knows about child abuse. But here's the letter from the government, and it's all very sorry to hear about Melanie and the sexual abuse she suffered. Child sexual abuse is a reprehensible crime, and no matter where it occurs, the government is dedicated to dealing with it. It goes on and on and on, and it's all pretty unpleasant stuff. They're also sorry that Melanie was harassed and victimised by Nottinghamshire police, and the minister, well, can't really look into that. In fact, the minister can't really do anything. Let's have a look at how it comes out. I've just paraphrased it to keep it simple on screen. But basically, the government and ministers are unable to intervene in individual cases. This is the line. Of course, it's not true. When they want to intervene, they can. But when it's child abuse, we can't intervene in individual cases. And with regard to complaints around Nottingham Council that ran the children's home that Melanie was involved with, Beechwood, well, we can't really get involved in that. That will be a matter for the child abuse inquiry that is now on its fourth chairperson. And on it goes. It says, don't worry, because victims and survivors will be central to the inquiry's work. And it also says that the Home Secretary at the time, Theresa May, confirmed that the police Operation Hydrant will link directly into the inquiry. So there's all the smooth talk. Don't worry, don't worry. Everything is under control and the police are there to help. But at the bottom was a sting in the tail. Let's have a look at that on screen properly. Here we are, yours sincerely, and a squiggle, and the safeguarding unit. No name, no legible signature. So this is another one of these anonymous government letters, and this has a real impact. So it's an appeasement letter. There's no substance. This is spin. It's a line, but there's no proper signature. Well, we'll remind ourselves that our new Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, is very big on children, and she's been visiting a local primary school and cuddling the little ones. So she would have us believe that she's very interested in children and protecting children, but it seems to be the opposite that's true. The other thing we need to remember is that there is definitely a love-in between Amber Rudd and the Prime Minister. So here's Amber's Twitter page, and she's got a really horrific embedded video of the Prime Minister. I do encourage people to go and watch it because it's so appalling. We had a little joke before we went live that Theresa May has received such a makeover. She's glistening eyes. She's the fairy queen, I think. So this is where life gets interesting, because in having a look around what was going on with children, we came across this Twitter page from Labour MP Jess Phillips, and she was asking a question: has the new Minister for Preventing Abuse, Exploitation and Crime been announced since Karen Bradley stood down because she said she couldn't find her? And a few other people comment on this lady's Twitter page to say, well, we couldn't find her either. This morning, we phoned the Home Office to see whether we could speak to the person who had written that letter. Like you listened in as I made the call, it was extraordinary because we entered no man's land of confusion, muddle, uncertainty. Nobody knew where the person was who wrote the letter. And indeed, they didn't even know who the new Minister for Preventing Child Exploitation was. So if we put this on screen in the simplest form, we called the Home Office to see who wrote the letter, but because the letter has no proper signature, you are unable to identify who wrote the letter. So unfortunately, the call centre for the Home Office, which is based in Northern Ireland, was unable to put us through to anybody sensible in the Home Office at all.
That was a private company running that call centre?
Private company running the call centre. I'm going to say the young guy who took the call did his best. He was doing his job. But this is the little game. The government sends out letters with no name, no signature, knowing that if you try and make a phone call to respond, you will not be connected. But in the discussion, they thought that the safeguarding unit was part of the Department for Education. So they suggested that we should speak to them, which we did. And in the conversation with them, they were unsure who'd written the letter. They were also unsure who the Minister for Child Sexual Exploitation was. So a big question mark. But we were able to solve the problem because it's none other than Sarah Newton, who is the MP for Truro, so quite close to home, and she's got the role. So if we put the other pieces in, she's directly responsible for the Child Sexual Abuse Inquiry, which has achieved nothing despite the millions spent. Not to worry, because they're linked into Operation Hydrant and the National Police Chiefs Council. Well, they're headed up by Sarah Thornton, who was the very head of police in Thames Valley that didn't want to do anything with child abuse. So we bring in the lovely Amber Rudd, and she's having the love-in with there we are, the glistening Prime Minister. And what is happening? Nothing. But what they have managed to do is to put a child abuse survivor in prison, deny her medication, put her in solitary, deny her letters, deny her visits, and appear to be extremely concerned about the knowledge that Melanie has in her head of British politicians involved in child abuse. So we'll just finish up with a look at the fairy princess herself. Here she is, Theresa May. I hope you can understand what I was getting at. Her eyes glistening with youthful vigour. She says her beliefs are straightforward. She believes that our country needs to work for everyone, not just the rich, Mike, for the privileged, for those that know the right people or who have the loudest voices. She goes on, but a country that really works for everyone, where everyone can be who they want to be. And so to ensure the country works for everyone, we need to fight for it, standing up for the vulnerable, the voiceless. At this point, you feel slightly queasy, I think.
Yeah,
but
if somebody said to me, who is the one person in the country that's going to stand up for the vulnerable and the voiceless, somehow I don't think Theresa May's name would spring to mind.
Well, I still regard her as the Jezebel Prime Minister. She's incredibly good in makeup. She's got those glistening eyes, the sincerity of a Conservative. She doesn't mean a word she says. And she goes on here, little children in the background. She is going to stand up against those that feel they're strong and powerful, to which I think we should watch her very carefully. She says, if you're doing the right thing, then you must do that, however difficult it is, even if there may be a less difficult path to take. This is almost like a prayer, Mike, really. And let's get rid of the makeup and see her more as she really is. And we've got to ask a question. Who are these strong, powerful people she's so worried about? Are these her establishment and political friends protecting the child abusers? There's something particularly unsavoury going on, but the meat of it is that when we called the Home Office this morning simply to ask to talk about the serious subject of child abuse, total confusion. We don't know who wrote the letter. We don't know whether it's the Home Office or the Department of Education. We're not too sure. We don't know who the minister is, but rest assured we're doing everything we can to protect children. Mark, it really, I was going to say, it makes me very sad that my country has descended into such a state. In fact, it makes me sick to the core that we are now clearly run by politicians who are prepared to lie. It's not just spinning the truth, it's lying. And these are the same people who are heading us on the path to war. My only concern as far as the States is concerned is, as we have often said, when the casualties mount, it will be American armed forces that pay the price of what Theresa May and her government do. Over to you.
Indeed. I can only say that her comments are cryptic, and she seems to be talking about the very powerful clique, the very power clique that she's a member of, and yet speaking as if she's not a member. There's something very Orwellian there. She's saying the vulnerable need a voice. Well, if the vulnerable need a voice, why are the British people trapped in this system that they can barely extricate themselves from? Everything she says needs to be done are the things that the British government, including herself, are mitigating against. So they put log jams in front of, and they put barriers in front of the very reforms that she's calling for. So she's preventing the very things that she says need to happen. Whistleblowers, she's saying people need to stand up. They need to speak out. Well, look what happens when the whistleblowers do so. They become imprisoned, like Melanie Shaw. And so there's something very, it's beyond double talk. It's newspeak, if there ever was newspeak. Right there, that is a prime specimen of it. And the U.S., yes, as you say, Brian, is mainly the capital that bleeds. It leads and it bleeds. It doesn't lead from behind like Rasmussen is trying to say. That's nonsense. The U.S. is front and center, spending the most treasure and bleeding the most for this new world order. But Britain plays a very integral role in conjunction with the U.S., providing more economic muscle and more political savvy. And the reforms she speaks of are not allowed to happen, even though at the same time she says that we need them. So that's what's most distressing, is they mitigate against the very things they claim need to happen.
Yeah. Well, it's newspeak. I think it's we could put a layer above that. Effectively, it's a complete inversion. Truth has become, or lies have become truth. We're into the
exactly.
Yeah.
There's not much more to say.
There's a pause. Okay, we'll say thank you very much for joining us, Mark. Pleasure to have you as always. And we look forward to getting you back on UK Column News. Reminder to all of our audience, if you're not yet signed up for that British Constitution Group event. We have to start reasserting the rule of law somewhere. Winchester, as you will hear in due course, is a great place to do that. And also, if you like what we do, please consider subscribing or making a donation. We can only do what we do with your help and support. That's it for today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.